Welcome to another episode of Hoopsology. I am Justin Goodrum, joined by Matt Thomas. What's up, man?
Man, what's up? It has been a busy week for the show and a really fun week for the show. This is, I think, our record week in terms of content interviews. We had our trade deadline special. So
Yeah.
just having a blast, man. What's up with you?
Yeah, it's been really fun. And if you're listening to the podcast portion, had a really great chat with Bijan Bain. He wrote a book on Elgin Baylor, just talking about his legacy to the NBA. So I never thought I'd be saying this. Any of you young bucks out there, want to know more about the history of basketball in general. That was an awesome chat just to chop it up with Bijan for a couple of minutes. We also have a discussion with Jake Fisher and Jordan Liggins. That's going to be on both the audio and YouTube channels of Hoopsology as well. So stay tuned for that. And Matt, as you mentioned, and maybe at the end of this, we'll run down what we have, but just a plethora of just interviews and just analysis from those really close to the game of basketball. I'd like to thank all of our guests for appearing on the show just to give us a few minutes of their time. It's been really great just talking to all these experts in all phases of the game. It's been really cool.
Absolutely, man. I just feel like my basketball brain has expanded this week talking to all these people. It's been
Agreed.
Fun.
Totally. On today's show, we're going to talk about a couple of roster moves right after the trade deadline, featuring LaMarcus Aldridge and Andre Drummond. And then, Matt, you have your trends in the NBA this week. So let's not waste any time. And what's going on in the NBA this week, man?
Let's do it. So looking at trends this week, which again is winning or losing 3 or more games. Just a quick recap as of our recording today on Sunday. In the East, we had Charlotte and the Knicks have won their last 3 games. Chicago, although this will probably change soon, trading down, they've lost their last 3. Detroit have lost their last 4, and the Miami Heat have lost their last 6 games. In the West, the Jazz and the LA Clippers have won their last 5. The Sacramento Kings have won their last 4. Golden State Warriors have lost their last 4. So those are our trends. Also, one that's really important, at least to me on a personal level. The Rockets played the Timberwolves, the only team in the West with a worse record than them, and they snapped that 20-plus game losing streak. I think it had worked up to 21, maybe 22 games at that point. So good to have that off their backs. Houston no longer on a 20-plus game losing streak. Another thing that happened over the weekend, significance, Coach Popovich, you probably saw this, Justin. He won his 1,300th game.
He did.
That puts him, he's only the 3rd coach to get that many wins. He's 32 wins away from tying Coach Lenny Wilkins for 2nd wins all time. And he's only 35 away from tying Coach Don Nelson for the winningest NBA coach of all time. In other news, Mike Woodson, former Knicks coach. He coached the Hawks as well, as you might remember. World famous goatee, Coach Mike Woodson.
Sure.
He was an assistant coach this year. I just saw before we went on air, Justin, he is switching over to the college game, and he's going to be replacing head coach Archie Miller at Indiana University. So those are my trends for the week. Justin, did you have any thoughts on any of those or anything to add?
Congrats to Popovich. You know he's a legend in the game.
Absolutely.
Other than that, not really. I think with Chicago, I think Zach LaVine was out when Vucevic made his debut. So, but nevertheless, they lost it. I think I heard they're down by like 37. So like they deserve to lose. So I mean, what are you going to do? That's why, as I said last week, and I'm talking to our esteemed guest, my expectations of Chicago are minimal to low. I'd be happy that's got into the play-in tournament, and whatever happens. Let the cards fall where they may. But I don't have any high hopes. Other than that, I would say looking at like the teams that are streaking, the Jazz continue to do really well. They're at the top, and as we'll discuss with Jordan, as you'll see in the interview, talking about the MVP race. I mean, we didn't mention the Utah Jazz or the Phoenix Suns, and yet they're atop of the West. So I just find that fascinating. And when we get to the playoffs, we'll see if we were disrespecting them or we're right by totally ignoring them. So we'll just have to wait and see there.
Yep, matchups as always.
Yeah.
Come down to matchups, and man, it is going to be hilarious to see the Jazz fans responding if they beat like the Lakers or the Clippers in a playoff series.
We never hear the end of it.
I'm still on the doubtful side that they can do that in the playoffs. They still need to show me that for me to really buy in. I'm not going to pick them over either of those teams, full disclosure for right now. But man, if they do it, I'll fully own it and give them props. They will earn it at that point.
Well, it's a rite of passage for Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, right? It's gonna put up or shut up. I mean, if you want to be considered elite, and all these players, especially when you're an All-Star, I'm sure the Hall of Fame is on their minds. Not all the time, but at the end of your career, you want to be established. And with specifically the Utah Jazz, and specifically, I'm blanking on his name, point guard. You know who I'm talking about?
Conley.
Oh no, just the Donovan Mitchell.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I feel like he's probably more disrespected than Damian Lillard is, but you beat the Lakers with LeBron and Anthony Davis healthy in a playoff series. Even if you lose in the NBA Finals, you are established, and the Utah Jazz will arrive as a conference power. So I think this playoff is critical for them, not only to get the 1 seed, but to move far as well, or else they're not going to be taken seriously. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Same kind of thing for the Suns, man. I mean, the story behind Chris Paul and his history in the playoffs, I mean, there's respect there, no doubt. But,
sure.
In terms of having something to prove, that's still something that Chris Paul hasn't been able to take.
Yeah.
So, it's still to be seen there. I'm hoping, going back to the Jazz, it was really fun last year getting Jazz versus Nuggets. So I hope we can see that matchup again in the first round. And maybe they come off on the winning side this year, depending on how the Nuggets are looking with Aaron Gordon on that roster now.
Agreed. They're an underrated rivalry within the NBA. So seeing that play in the playoffs, I'm looking forward to that. So, man, let's hop into just a couple of these roster moves. And there's one confirmed, one that's not as the recording of this podcast I just checked. And it has been officially confirmed. So let's get to LaMarcus Aldridge, which has been confirmed. He has signed with the Brooklyn Nets. He is a 7-time All-Star. The Nets continue to get richer. He agreed, Aldridge, to a buyout with the San Antonio Spurs. I remember when he went to San Antonio, it was supposed to be like a huge deal. Him and DeMar DeRozan. It was supposed to be kind of like a transition of the Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili era has not really worked out that way. He goes to Brooklyn, and now their biggest weakness, as we've discussed with some of our other, guests, the interior, this seems to solve that problem, I guess, briefly. And I think it's going to be interesting just to see how he measures up ultimately with Embiid. I think that's the reason they got him, is to not only compete with Embiid, but Giannis as well. So what do you make of this signing? Do you think this solidifies Brooklyn as like the odds-on favorite easily to go to the NBA Finals, to be that Eastern Conference representative?
Yeah, I'm definitely buying the Nets getting to the finals at this point, assuming that all their key players are healthy and most of that team is healthy. I do think they just have so much firepower right now. I do buy, even though Blake Griffin is on the downside of his career, same thing for LaMarcus Aldridge. I have both very smart players that I think can contribute, and having more depth on this roster, they're hopefully not going to be taxed with too many minutes or more minutes that they can handle while still being effective. So even though LaMarcus Aldridge isn't the defender that he was when he was a Trailblazer, let's say, and Blake, same story, but for when he was in his youth, he can get out to that three-point line as fast when guarding, power forwards that can shoot from out there. But hopefully they can play them for just an effective amount of minutes to where that kind of playoff toll and into the season toll isn't going to add up for them. We already have seen that they're resting those star players from time to time to kind of stretch this out and also try and ensure these players don't get injured. I think this team is in a really good place. I don't know. Am I giving too much, I guess, weight into these acquisitions here? Do you think that that they shouldn't be considered the favorite?
I think they should be considered the favorite. Looking at this, the Eastern Conference, even though it's competitive, it would be one of the most shocking upsets in the history of sports if they don't make it to the NBA Finals. Just looking at just the standings here, I mean, it's the Bucks, the Nets, and the 76ers. The other teams are irrelevant. And it's funny to say that it's because, the Knicks have the fifth seed, but are you really going to take them serious as a contender? Probably not. And with the Nets, even though I have issues with them in terms of a lot of offensive firepower and their weaknesses defensively, just with the competition within the conference, I feel like they're just better. Not to mention, this championship experience counts for a lot. That's a highly valuable commodity, and we've seen it with Giannis, and we've seen it with Embiid and Ben Simmons. They don't have that, and with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, they do. They have title experience where they have come up, as the victors. And that's huge in a playoff situation. So I think they are the odds-on favorite to go to the NBA Finals. I just think, even though James Harden is playing phenomenally, I think that's going to be very interesting in terms of legacy, right? Because this is very vital. No, I'm kind of going off subject, but this is a huge year. You brought up Chris Paul. I think this is huge for James Harden. Like, Kevin Durant can be mediocre. Kyrie Irving can be mediocre. James Harden cannot, especially the way he's been playing this year. He has to play phenomenally, else this is going to be a stain. I mean, everything's set up for him to succeed, as you'll hear with Jordan Liggins later this week, in terms of he's much happier now, and he's performing. So in a playoff situation, if we see him, decrease his production, and Kyrie and Kevin Durant pick up that load, even though if they win the title, I think it's still going to hurt him, unfortunately. So I'm curious to see James Harden's performance now that he's surrounded with a lot of talent. Everything's set up for him to succeed. I am very curious to see, ultimately if the choking is a factor or not. I'm very interested to see.
Yeah, let's not forget that even when we're looking back at when the Heat won the first title in 2012 against that young OKC team, James Harden was the guy who took the fall in the series as the sixth man. So he should be as hungry as ever. And I've never sensed effort as a huge problem in recent years. There was that year against the Clippers that was a terrible look with him on the bench, but he should be hungry and ready to perform. And he should have the motivation to do that because he's had so much criticism in the playoffs, and obviously he still hasn't won a title, and he's 32. So he's that age where it's kind of imperative that he wins one soon. Let me ask you this.
Yeah, sure.
Are the Nets the 2020 version of the 2010 Miami Heat? Now that we're seeing, the Heat had like Shane Battier come in, Mike Miller come in, started getting these kind of default free agents. When a veteran was looking for a title for a while there, it seemed like the Heat were going to land them 80% of the time if the Heat were interested in them. Are the Nets that destination now?
I think yes and no. I think the difference is with the Heat, I would say from just remembering that team, they seem to be the clear just favorite with those big three. And I think, I want to say, I'm trying to pull it up now, the year that they didn't get it done in terms of the big three. Was that 2010? Was that 2009? I couldn't remember.
2010 was the decision.
Okay,
so
got it.
2010, 2011 was the first year that they lost to the Mavericks.
Gotcha.
2011, 2012 was the title year.
Okay, so in that year, they had tons of hype in a full season. Yeah. I mean, this season, despite, it was a lot of questions, right? What is Kevin Durant? How's he going to look? The whole thing with Kyrie Irving happened. And then enter James Harden. How's he going to adjust playing on a new team? They had a lot of adversity compared to with LeBron. It just seemed like this juggernaut, right? But these guys are also friends too with Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and LeBron. So I would say the pressure was more on that Heat team. And I think with the Nets, I understand that it's championship or bust, but due to the circumstances of, COVID and just, anything can happen, right? I mean, just because the vaccine's out there, it's still a very unpredictable situation. So I would say with the Nets, they might get gifted a year just in terms of the benefit of the doubt if somehow they were to lose, especially to the Lakers. I think anything getting bounced by the 76ers or Milwaukee or any other team, they'll get ridiculed for sure. They'll get destroyed. But them not winning the NBA title, I do think they're afforded some latitude due to the circumstances. But maybe I'm in the minority because everything I'm hearing is championship or bust. So I think I'm in the minority and thinking that way. But ultimately, I think 20 years from now, if they don't win the title, I think history should be on their side in the circumstances that we're in.
Well, it does seem like, the comparison that you can't make, it doesn't seem like the Nets are being treated like villains.
No.
Like the Heat were in 2010. And
I
obviously,
don't think so.
Most of that is the decision from LeBron.
Yeah.
So they don't have something quite similar to that. I mean, a lot of people are critical of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but it doesn't seem like it's to the same degree or maybe we're just desensitized to it a little bit as well. Now that we've had more and more time under the player empowerment era, we're kind of used to players just, you go somewhere, you team up with someone. This is how it works now,
For sure. I don't have any more thoughts on the Aldridge. I think it's a good signing. It addresses one of their weaknesses, and we'll have, again, as I always say, we'll have to see how it plays out. Did you have any other thoughts on this, Matt?
Yeah, let me ask you this, too.
Yeah.
With the Nets, I do see them now. It's kind of like this tug of war between the Lakers and the Nets. As we'll talk about Drummond.
Sure.
Rumors were Drummond would sign with the Nets.
I heard that.
Or this Aldridge thing came up, and now it looks like he may likely go to the Lakers. We'll see what happens. That should be confirmed later today, like we said. But I look at like Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. I've criticized them here and there on the show. Just KD had the weird thing with Twitter burners, things like that. Kyrie has had tons of quirks, stuff like that. People know about this. I'm wondering, as like someone who is a coworker, like a fellow NBA player, do you think that maybe Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are more endearing to those players and like more attractive to play with than what I might perceive? Or is this strictly like, hey, the Nets have a great organization. They have Steve Nash, who seems like he'd be awesome to work with, and the infrastructure is there. I want to win a title. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on like, I guess the attractiveness of playing with KD and Kyrie? Is that a bigger thing than I realize?
I don't think so. I think it's them trying to win the title for the most part as a destination. I don't necessarily think it's just the play with them per se. And also, you have three guys currently on the team, and now even if you have a bench core, right, that they're high volume shooters, so the ball's not going to go to you a lot. So for somebody for LaMarcus Aldridge, the thing you have to ask is, is he going to start for this team? And also, he's been kind of injury prone too. So I think mostly they're just trying to get the chip. However, I think with this Brooklyn Nets team, there's some humility is going to have to take place. And I think with somebody like Andre Drummond, who's like a defensive specialist, he can just focus on playing defense, whereas LaMarcus Aldridge, he's more of like a two-way player. So, I think that's going to be an adjustment. I mean, they are
DeAndre Jordan.
Sorry, DeAndre Jordan.
Okay. Just make it
yeah. Well, I think. Well, I guess what I meant was Andre Drummond. If he were to sign to the Brooklyn Nets,
gotcha.
I think it would be an easier fit. You just have to worry about playing defense. And also, you brought up DeAndre Jordan. Like, you already got a guy like that, so that'd be. I mean, I just think you have the same guy there. So I think with LaMarcus Aldridge, you have a little bit more of an offensive firepower too, and I think it opens the floor for those guards as well. I mean, Kevin Durant, even though he's 7 foot, he plays like a guard. He's not usually in the post. So I think potentially if LaMarcus Aldridge stays healthy and stays motivated, I think it solidifies the Nets. I would probably pick them against the Lakers in quite all honesty. But, there's a lot of question marks as well. I didn't even heard, like, I think Kyrie took another, like, I guess sabbatical or break or something. He's been gone for a little bit, and it's been spotty with all these guys playing together cohesively. So there's still a lot of question marks. I mean, by no means I'm just saying the title it's over and the Nets are going to win. But does it increase their chances of winning the title? I think it does.
Absolutely. And you also, bringing up DeAndre Jordan, I'll add that now you don't have to have DeAndre Jordan on the court for the last 2 minutes of the game. You can instead slot LaMarcus Aldridge in there, a guy who can knock down free throws. I mean, comparatively, to DeAndre Jordan, shooting much better free throw percentage there. So definitely makes them more versatile. And you're right, we haven't seen the three main guys together a whole bunch, even still at this point. But anytime we have seen the three of them together, the offense is just absurd. Yeah. So it's going to be kind of interesting and maybe shocking to people if we're getting them all three together for every single game of the playoffs. I mean, there's a possibility here that they could just like sweep the first 3 rounds. I'm not saying I'm picking that because things do tighten up in the playoffs a little bit, but man, it would be fascinating to see if they've built such an offensive juggernaut here that even that tightening up, that intensity that happens, less fast breaks, less turnovers typically in the playoffs, if they can even still break through that with the potency of their offense, it could be very historic.
Yeah, it could be. But that's why they play the games, right? We'll just have to see how the rest of the league adapts to it. If you don't have anything else, Matt, we can just move on to this Andre Drummond thing.
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't really think there's too much to add because I've been looking on Twitter, and from far as I can tell, it's not 100% confirmed yet. So I'll just read what Bobby Marks, he's a ESPN reporter, has said. So we're recording this on March 28th. It's past, by the time of this recording, it's past 5 p.m. Eastern time. So it says once Andre Drummond clears waivers at 5 p.m. Eastern time, he intends to sign with the Lakers. His agent, Jeff Schwartz of Excel Basketball, tells ESPN. And then it says here, the contract for Andre Drummond in Los Angeles is in the amount of $7,994. $536 that he gave back in his buyout with the Cavaliers. The Lakers will get close to $600,000 a cap hit. The Lakers are about a little bit under $1 million below the hard cap and have enough room to sign a 15th player. But the Andre Drummond thing, I'm going to check now. That's not 100% confirmed, but I guess it seems like we can operate under the assumption that he's going to be signed with the Lakers. If that is the case, which I think it's going to be, what do you make of this? I don't know. I'm kind of shrugging my shoulders. He's a nice piece to add defensively. Nice, in terms of getting Anthony Davis a break, but in terms of being like a massive difference maker, I don't see it, so I don't have too many thoughts on this. How about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, well, I mean, Drummond's specialties are post scoring, which almost doesn't happen in the NBA anymore. I mean,
no,
rare, but he's a guy who can get a bucket in the post and a rebounder. Of course, there's several games in Cleveland and throughout his career where he's had 20 plus rebounds. So he's a guy who can really help on the boards. I don't know, because the Lakers, I think, needed more defense than they're going to get with Andre Drummond. Not really a guy who's a rim protector. Trying to think of him maybe slotting in as a backup defensive center, like what they're kind of missing when they lost Dwight Howard this past offseason. So I don't know that he can really fill that role. I think they need bodies in LA right now, so he'll help with that. Certainly, he'll play useful minutes. But in terms of when things, again, like tighten up in the playoffs, like I mentioned earlier, I don't know how impactful of a role Andre Drummond is going to play, because in the West, especially thinking of that matchup against the Clippers, he can probably play while Zubac is on the floor.
Yeah.
But man, when Ibaka's on the floor, when they are lighting things up from 3-point range, I don't know that you want Andre Drummond out on the floor. And you also have some concerns about free throw shooting there. He has gotten better since his Detroit days, certainly. But,
sure.
I guess I'll say this is not as good of a get as the LaMarcus Aldridge get, even though LaMarcus Aldridge is older. But still useful, still helpful, especially in this time where LeBron is out and AD. We'll see when he comes back in April, but useful to fill the gap for this time anyway.
Well, I think he'll be nice. You mentioned the post scoring. That is true. I mean, before he left Cleveland, he was averaging about 17 points a game, and that's been consistent for the last, I would say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I think that will be good to give Anthony Davis a rest, especially when he's been hurt. So that will be nice to have that. At the same time, I guess what I'm thinking in terms of offensive production when I think again I'll reference to Jordan Liggins' interview. I think didn't he say Anthony Davis? You'll hear it in the interview that he's like glass, or he's very fragile. And,
yeah, she called him glass, man. I thought for a second she was talking about he gets a lot of rebounds or something. Which that's Drummond.
yeah, for sure. I just think in terms of him going up against the Joker, that kind of makes me nervous in terms of the backup position if Anthony Davis is hurt. So I think those are the questions I wonder if Anthony Davis does go down, can he fulfill that role? I don't think he can. But we'll just have to again. Maybe I can be proven wrong. I'm not sure, but I just don't have that feeling that in the event that Davis is hurt, he'll be able to kind of fill in there.
Great points, man. And I think to your point, you mentioned Jokic. I mean, do you remember how physical Dwight Howard got with Jokic in the playoffs? Yeah. Drummond isn't that guy. Drummond is not going to rattle Jokic at all. I mean, Jokic will potentially run all over him, not physically, but just spin circles, pass circles around him. So I do think that's a real concern. But definitely a good get considering what it is. Considering it's not a big cap hit, a good body to have on your roster for sure. I mean, he'll be useful, just maybe not necessarily in the ways that I think the Lakers need once Anthony Davis is back and healthy. You're right. No one can replace Anthony Davis.
For sure. And I guess this signing is officially gone down. Magic Johnson, let me just double check this. I think he just tweeted out, congratulations to Andre Drummond for signing with the Lakers and welcome to Los Angeles. Andre is just what the Lakers need, a big man who can score, rebound, and defend. So, I mean, if Magic Johnson says it's official, I think it's fairly safe to say that he's with the Lakers unless something weird happens for sure. So, Matt, did you have anything else to add on Andre Drummond?
No, man, I think that's some solid Andre Drummond analysis you guys just got right there. Probably
for sure.
More than you wanted.
Well, always thanks for listening to the show. As Matt mentioned, a ton of interviews from Phil Doucette, breaking down NBA Top Shot, Kelly Oubre Sr., Matthew Gutierrez, the Orangemen currently, they went down to Houston, and they're making it to the Elite Eight. So, Matt, you have a little bit of history with the University of Houston as well in terms of being a fan of theirs. So that must be cool for you.
Definitely.
We have an interview with Tom Moore, Arthur Alcala of ESPN. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But our podcast feed and our YouTube feed has all of our interviews, so please go check that out. And then we have 2 interviews coming up this week with Jake Fisher and with Jordan Liggins. So Jordan Liggins is the co-host of the Spinsters podcast. A really great interview with her, just covering the NCAA, the WNBA, and the NBA as well. And then Jake Fisher, he wrote Built to Lose, How the NBA's Taken Era Changed the League Forever. That comes out May 4th, so please go get that book once it drops and enjoy that chat. I'll get you a preview in terms of what that book's going to be all about. So tons of great content coming out this week and tons of interesting interviews just to get you all set for what's happening. As I said, this week. So for Matt Thomas, I am Justin Goodrum. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.
Peace.